first of all, man, I want to thank you for all the times you came on Gutfeld during your historic run for president. I really appreciate that. It was a lot of fun. And I think we made some history because I think you're the only presidential candidate who pulled off in a blizzard, hopped into a liquor store just to talk to the American people. So first of all, I want to thank you for that. And it was an inspirational run.
That was fun.
Now, I looked at your stepping out a little differently than a lot of people did. I took it that you looked at it as the right thing to do in terms of supporting the wrong that has been done to President Trump and the Republican Party for the last, 8 years. And I was like, here's a guy who's making a tremendous statement, and you were one of the first ones to be like, you know what? I'm going to fall in line. And I thought that was an amazing, because a lot of people don't have that integrity. And I thought that was an amazing thing about your run, because you were making noise, my friend.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. I am guided. I'm a guy who's guided by my gut, right? And so I only decided to run for president in January of 2023. It was literally in January we decided, but I don't like to dither around. By February, I was in the race. And similarly, going into the Iowa caucus, so this was now the following January 24, I truly did not that night have a plan for what came next, right? We were going to New Hampshire and was continuing straight out. But then it was like, okay, the results have come in. Let me just take a big step back. We had this apartment in Des Moines. My wife and I, we just kind of quietly hung out there for about 25 minutes, half an hour, and just reflected on the fact of, okay, why did we enter this? What's important to the future of the country? This is the right answer. And it felt like so foreign. If you had told me that even 24 hours before, it was in the thick of running the race. Right. But if you take a step back, you just take those moments occasionally where you just can occasionally find some quiet to step back and just reflect on what's right. That's how I make my decisions, and that's how that one went down.
Okay, well, let's talk, because you built a lot of energy and you got a lot of youthful excitement about the Republican Party. Given what's coming up now, when you look at 2028, when you look at the future, will you continue that path to run for president? Because I again, given the extraordinary, crazy situations that this current, it's literally, we've had candidates pop in and out left and right on the left. Given the craziness of this whole thing, this whole Trump dementia, 2028, whether you like it or not, that part of our American history is going to be over. And we'll be looking for someone to pick it up and continue. Is that what you're bracing yourself for? Are you going to continue to grow and do things to let people know that 2028, I call you V-Dog. V-Dog is going to be back, because I just feel like
it's funny because that used to be my nickname in second grade. They used to call me V-Dog.
Yeah, it's just I always said the thing about you that was most attractive to me in terms of a voter is you have a great likability. You just speak it straight up. And I don't know if you don't like what I'm saying, find out why you don't like what I'm saying. And you always made some really strong points. So when you look at that, will you continue this path?
I'm not going to leave public life until I feel like I've had a real impact on the country, right? And one of the things that I'm proud of achieving in the campaign, there's a million things I would have done differently, believe me, small things. But in the big things, one of the things I'm most proud of is we were able to engage in conversations with people who don't always agree with us. I think Republicans, and I think Democrats do this too, of course, but fall into our own echo chambers and silos. And one of the things I tried to do was to say, I'm not running to lead a party, I'm running to lead a country.
Yes.
And you know what? I still believe this country is worth uniting. It's worth saving. It's worth fighting for. And so I've found, Tyrus, in my life, so I come from the world of business. I really never have had a particular plan that I've made for myself personally in life go exactly according to that plan. It just doesn't happen.
Me either.
But when you're called by your sense of purpose, you see what happens. The plan reveals itself. And so I'm open to whatever direction it goes. I think I'm going to stay in public life until I feel like I've had my impact at the biggest scale possible. And what that is, we'll take it month by month and year by year and see what.
Could we be possibly looking at governor V-Dog or senator? There's a lot of roles I think that you could do at a high level. I'm sure there would be some position at the White House at some point. But yeah. Oh, good. Breaking. I love.
No, I'm looking at those seriously.
As you should.
In all seriousness, right? I'm not going to close the door, right? So one of the things I was most passionate about in my presidential run, and that I'm passionate for the future of the country, is shutting down bureaucracy, right? That, I think, is one of the great cancers on American culture today, not just in government, but in government too. You could do that at the federal level. You could do that at the state level, right? I'm an executive by nature. I'm a business guy. Governor is something that people are pushing me for a lot in Ohio, and how could I not consider it? But also there's J.D. Vance's Senate seat that's now open in my home state in Ohio, and I think that's something that a lot of people have really pushed me to consider. And President Trump and I have had great conversations about doing something substantial, not small, but maybe a couple roles that could be really big roles in the cabinet or the new administration. And so there's pros and cons probably to each of those, but I'm evaluating whatever the next step is, it'll be something that has high impact. And, you're called by your sense of purpose, make it about what you're doing rather than yourself. That's the way I look at it.
I always find it interesting that when people jump into something that they don't need to, you are a successful businessman isn't even the right word. Like you have wealth to where you don't have to work anymore. You could just spend all your time with your wife and kids, travel the world, and not look back because you put the work in. To step over into these waters, which in a lot of times will affect your bottom line business-wise because, wait, now you're either on one side or the other. What makes a man who seemingly has it all want to even jump into this fire? Like, was it what you were seeing? Yeah. Was it a calling? Was it an individual? Like a lot of times I'll run into somebody, he'll be at the shopping market, I'm shopping, and someone will say something to me so profound that I'll be at home thinking about it, and then I find that that's what I'm talking about on TV the next night. Was it one thing that made you go, you know what? I gotta put on the uniform and jump on the field?
I think it was having kids was a big change for me. So I stepped down from my job as a CEO about a little less than a year after our first son was born. And it felt like we were thinking about a lot of these questions, right? Like even, you have these different types of assets and how do you set up the inheritance for your kids? Like that was actually it's funny you bring this up because I haven't really talked about this, but even when my wife and I went through the process of thinking about what they call in the business executive world, estate planning, right? Like how do you maximally pass on to your children the wealth that you've accumulated? That was actually a big step back for my wife and I both, where neither of us grew up in wealth. Both of us have lived the American dream. We were not entirely sure that even the idea of passing on massive numbers of green pieces of paper to our kids is going to be good for them. We've both gone to school with or grown up with people who that wasn't actually a great favor that their parents did them.
Right. Yes.
But it really did raise the question of like, what inheritance do we want to give our kids? It's the example we want to set for them. It's a country where they're able to achieve the same things that we are. And I'm genuinely worried that country doesn't exist today in the same way, and certainly is not going to exist 20 years from now in the same way as the country that gave me and my wife Apoorva those opportunities. And so I think becoming a parent and almost even thinking about this question of inheritance, right, which is a bigger question about what you want to pass on, especially from the standpoint of having been given many great gifts of this country, that year was a big turning point for me. And then I had this experience, right? It was that same year. So my son was born in February of 2020. Then we have this series of events that leads me as a CEO to supposedly, like every other tech and biotech CEO, make a statement on behalf of BLM, which I refused to do because I just thought it wasn't the job of a biotech company to be wading into those issues. Exactly. And then I experienced this major backlash. So here we are thinking about inheritance to our children, the inheritance of a country that we actually want to pass on to them. And then here I am seeing, even in the company and the business that I've created, the kind of political forces that are dividing up the rest of our culture. For me, it was just those things all came together to say, you know what, I've been given certain gifts. There's a lot of things I'm really bad at, but every one of us has our own unique gifts, and the ability to lead people is one of them. How am I able to put that to use in the biggest possible way for the country? And that kind of is what just led to a journey that said, you know what, if you're going to do something in life, a piece of advice that I got and I've always followed is it takes about as much effort to do something really small and to do it well as it does to do something really big and to do it well. And I do think that's true. Whether you're starting a small business, but you pour your heart and soul into it and you want to do that right, or as an artist or whatever it is, if you're using your gifts, you want to do something really small, you might as well do something really big. And so for me, if I was going to run, I was, in the first instance, going to make it at the biggest level possible. And that's what led me to the race.
When you talk to your son or when you talk to other young men, and they, again, I come from similar background, started on ground level zero. And as you rise up, the people you pass along the way and stuff, when you tell your story, because to go from where you came from to rise to the heights that you rose in business, then to jump into uncharted waters, when you talk about that process, and one of the things I love that you said that you talked about your failures, and you're one of the few people that sounds mortal. You know, like you're willing to talk about mistakes you made, things you made, and you talk about there's a lot of things. If you were to give advice to someone who was wrong, what was one thing that you would do differently if you were going to give someone, if someone came up to you and said, hey, I think about I want to run for office, and given off your experience and how you just kind of jumped in it, what's the biggest thing I should pay attention to? What would be your advice to any young Republican or Democrat thinking of getting in the game?
Yeah. So just to be clear, because I have answers to both these, you mean just like differently in life or differently in the context of the campaign?
And just in context of the campaign.
Oh, campaign. Yeah, that's a good one. So I gotta tell you, Tyrus, it's still only 7 months in, and I'm processing those learnings every day. Couple piece of advice I would give. One is, the reality is you got to know that your audience, if you want to win, the truth of the matter is the people who determine whether you win or not are not just the voters. It's the gatekeepers in between. You want to change the game, great. Change the game after you get in there. But if your goal is to win, you just have to understand that's reality as it exists today. The people who sit in, not even like TV hosts, but the executives that decide how they cover certain parts of a debate or certain parts of news items, them and the donors, I think, have a major influence on the way these elections are decided. Because you think you're talking to the voters, the ones who hear you directly. That's still a really small slice compared to the gatekeepers. And in this last time running for president, I just refused to play the game. I just didn't play the game.
Right.
And yeah, that's great. Admirable. I might feel self-admirable about that, pat myself on the back. But if you're playing to win, you also got to be at least understanding if your actual goal is to break the system. Unfortunately, there is part of a system that requires the path to getting there. And the question is, what are your goals? Is it to make a point? Is it to influence the conversation? Or is it to actually win? Be clear about yourself with that goal on day one. And I think what you actually do changes as a result. That's just hard truth. I think the other thing I would say is, there's so many smaller learnings, is you can't try to, and I say this as somebody who's been a CEO who ran, you can't actually win if you are both trying to be the CEO of your own operation while you're also the product, okay? As a political candidate, you are the product. Own it. But you got to probably have had years of working with trusted teams of people such that your machine and the running of that machinery, any unit of attention you're paying attention to that is a unit of attention that you're not paying to making yourself the best possible version of yourself. And then the third thing I would say is, oh, now you got me going. There's, they're really flowing.
Bro,
here.
It's your world. I'm soaking it in.
I was just, because you're taking me back to,
yep.
I have, so some of this is still a little bit raw, right? You still have some bruises that haven't fully healed, but you learn from, is you got to actually give yourself the space to think once in a while. See, the dilemma I was in is I was unknown at the time that I ran. It's an uphill mountain to climb. So I was going 24/7 nonstop all the time. But I'm also at my best when I have some space to actually reflect, take time and think. So one of the stupidest things I did in retrospect, it just wasn't a smart move, was before the first debate. And that was the real big catalyst in the campaign. And I'm glad with how I did and everything else. But a stupid thing that I did going into it was we were traveling to like 9 states in the 7 days leading up to it, was trying to do everything from like kicking off, external fundraising, which we hadn't focused on, to grassroots campaigning. I gave a speech on foreign policy at the Nixon Library, was going nonstop. What that actually did, first of all, was still a lot of the off-the-cuff interactions gave, I don't know if you remember that first debate, but one of the things that shocked me is I was actually the main object of attention on the stage.
Yeah, and I pointed, and I was the one who pointed out on TV, like, there's a reason why they're going at him. Because the people...
And I gave them the fodder to do it.
Yes.
I made it so easy for them. Whereas all the others, they took the 2 weeks off. They were silent. They were not doing media. because that's the traps you might fall into. Whereas I was doing the opposite. I said, you know what? I'm still going to travel the 9 states. And I think what might have been better is having achieved that success in the first 7 months of the campaign, or 6 months, whatever it was, to then just take a step back and collect one big deep breath and to say, all right, now we're moving into a different phase. Where the first phase, first 6 months, for most of that, I was irrelevant. Nobody knew who I was. I've already achieved here. I'm in the middle of that first debate stage. Now, how do I make sure the country really understands who I am and what I stand for, rather than just running a mile a minute? But the risk is then you let yourself be defined by the attacks that come from your fellow candidates or from the way the media chooses to portray you. That was a pause, and I wish I had taken a couple of weeks heading into that first debate to really transition to say, okay, now I'm done just making the points. I'm running to lead a country, and to really wear that mantle as opposed to just going on sheer energy, momentum, 24/7 mile a minute mode that I had been on in the first stage of the campaign. So those would be some of my learnings, I would say.
I would say there's something powerful about a man who can recognize a weakness, look in the mirror and correct it and work through it. And not just a man, anybody in general. But when you're able to have that type of insight with yourself, man, I'm excited to your future. And you got my vote, bruh. I just want to say that I was excited. I think it's historic. I don't even think you will quite understand it. It'll probably be one day, several years from now, that your son will walk in the house and it'll be from school or whatever. He's a grown man, like, hey, do you know you ran like this? Do you know you had it like this? And it will hit you, and I think you'll be very proud of that. I wish I'm excited about your future. Keep fighting the good fight, man. And as always, even though I'm not the top dog on Gutfeld, there's an open invite anytime. So you'll be my guest.
I appreciate it, man.
But yeah, you keep it up.
Hopefully we get to hang out more.
Yeah, say hello to your family for me.
You speak your mind. I love it.
Oh yeah. And say hello to your family. And take care, man. And best of luck and keep it up because we need more people like you. Thank you, sir.